Hello and welcome to The Current Thing with me, Nick Dixon. Now, just before we start this week's episode, I just want to make you aware that I'm bringing in a new feature on the podcast, which is if you subscribe to nickdixon.net, my Substack, for just £5 a month, you can ask questions of my upcoming guests. So become a paid subscriber, leave a question, and I will ask it of my future guests, and then they'll answer, and I'll put that video up on my Substack as well as a paywalled feature. So go to nickdixon.net and subscribe now, and you'll be able to get that when I start. And this will be people like Carl Benjamin, hopefully coming up, Ben Habib, Deputy Leader of Reform UK. Individual guests may cancel, but hopefully we have those lined up and loads more. So if you go to nickdixon.net and become a paid subscriber, you can ask questions of these future guests. And also, we'll be moving into the studio, so I won't have rubbish lighting like this. If anyone's watching this on video, we'll actually have a proper setup in the studio. But all of this costs money, so if you want to help us out, go to nickdixon.net and become a paid subscriber, and then we can keep the lights on and bring all these new features in. All right, so now let's get to the episode, which this week is once again with the Reverend Dr. Jamie Franklin. Let's go and talk to Jamie now. All right, so I'm here once again with the Reverend Dr. Jamie Franklin, host of the Irreverend podcast. I remember to say it this time. Welcome back to the show, Jamie.
Thanks so much, Nick. Really pleased to be here. Looking forward to the conversation as always.
Yeah, so today we thought we'd talk about a few things I wanted to pick up with you because I haven't seen you for a little while. And many people have been requesting you to come back on the show, by the way. Many people. And
That's kind.
They all asked you to come back. And they do want us to do another Bible series, which we will do.
Yeah, we will.
A lot more work.
We will at some time, at some point. Yeah.
Jamie's fee's too high for that, but
I need to learn Hebrew first. So
yeah, it could take a while.
Just in the midst of that.
Yeah. So instead, I thought I'd pick up a few things with you. One of which was it's about 11 days ago. I checked, but it's still relevant. It's Dawkins' comments on cultural Christianity, which were a bit bonkers. So I thought I'd just read out what he said and remind you and remind the listener / viewer. And he was on LBC, Richard Dawkins, and he said, "I call myself a cultural Christian. I'm not a believer, but there's a distinction between being a believing Christian and being a cultural Christian. I love hymns and Christmas carols, and I sort of feel at home in the Christian ethos. I feel that we're a Christian country in that sense. It's truth that statistically, the number of people who actually believe in Christianity is going down, and I'm happy about that. But I would not be happy if, for example, we lost all our cathedrals and our beautiful parish churches. So I count myself a cultural Christian. Certainly if we substituted any alternative religion, that would be truly dreadful." Now, even before I'd heard that last part, which was a bit later, I said, such a fundamentally absurd position. He wants the products of Christianity, but is happy that belief in it is going down. Obviously, you won't have the benefits of it for long in that case, and aggressive and undesirable ideologies will intrude. People think I'm weird for consciously concluding the only way is to return to Christianity, but it makes a lot more sense than whatever Dawkins is asking for. So those are my comments as a layman. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. One of the things that I think is striking about this is just the inconsistency of Dawkins' thinking and the way that he sort of presents himself as this kind of monolithic entity who's always been, this saying these very, very reasonable things. But this completely contradicts what he was saying before. I haven't read The God Delusion for many, many years, but he was certainly talking about Christianity as a sort of fundamental evil in society. Then I remember him actually slamming. I think he talks about it's either parish churches or cathedrals, and talking about how they've never been used as a domicile or something like that in that book. Other stuff, like he was. I've got memories of him wearing T-shirts saying "Religion, let's end it together." Religion, not just belief in religion, but religion in general. And granted, this wasn't him, but Christopher Hitchens has a book called "God is Not Great: Why Religion Poisons Everything." So it was very much part of that new atheist movement that it wasn't just belief in God which was bad; it was the whole outworking of belief. And the idea was that this sort of rational scientific outlook coupled with progressive liberalism would be a lot better if we just had that and got rid of religion. That was the idea, that was the argument, and I suggest here that the argument is fundamentally changing. Another thing on this as well is that I listened to a podcast. It was actually William Lane Craig's podcast where he was listening. This is all very meta. He was listening to Dawkins speaking to Alex O'Connor, I think this guy's name is, who's called the Cosmic Skeptic. And this podcast can't have been much more than a month old. And it's actually a hilarious exchange, because Alex O'Connor says to Dawkins, if you were to revise the God delusion now, what would you change about it? And Dawkins basically said he wouldn't change anything, because he thinks it all stands up, even though this book has been absolutely torn to shreds at both a popular and an academic level in multiple works. So that's just absolutely obnoxious to say that he doesn't have any kind of intellectual duty to respond to his critics. But he said, basically, I wouldn't change anything at all. The only thing I would do, this is very interesting, is I would add a chapter on belief in belief, because he thinks that this idea, this kind of idea that we're discussing now, has only emerged since he wrote that book. And he would be critical of that idea. He thinks that idea is patronizing, that that belief in itself is a good thing, and that you can kind of endorse it even if you don't believe yourself. But isn't that exactly what he's doing in this interview? Isn't he saying that Christianity needs to persist in some form because the fruits of it are good, even though he thinks that on the whole it would be better if people don't believe in it? I mean, maybe there's a distinction there, but surely in this view that he's advocating, certain people still have to believe in Christianity in order to actually maintain it. I mean, just think about it from a practical perspective. Churches, cathedrals, and things like that. You need people to actually believe it to maintain these things, and to maintain their cultural expression more generally. So anyway, I just think there's a massive inconsistency here, and I think the agenda has changed. And it seems to me that the agenda has changed for Dawkins, because he is now looking at what's happening, and he's recognizing the failure and the weakness of liberalism to protect the West against Islam. And he recognizes that really we need Christianity in order to act as a bulwark against it. So that's what I think is going on.
All right. Well, loads of interesting stuff there. I mean, firstly, it's a very small point when you're talking about Christopher Hitchens' book, How Religion Poisons Everything. Actually, Peter Hitchens said that Christopher Hitchens probably regretted that subtitle and thought it was a bit too strong, certainly for his later position. That's a minor point. The belief in belief point, very interesting. Yeah, that was essentially what Dawkins was espousing, as far as I could tell. It's something I kind of espouse. I mean, we can get onto the Islam part as well. I mean, I sort of have followed something a bit similar to Pascal's wager. I mean, I've sort of said it's good to just believe for its own sake, not because of, as Pascal says, because the benefits outweigh the negatives in terms of the afterlife and so on. More just because it's good for society. But as far as I know, I'm the only person that's come up with that, so I'm claiming that as a kind of, maybe I'm just sort of idiot savant. Loads of people have come up with it through history, but I've come up with it myself.
Yeah.
But that was a little bit. But that would be a little bit of my argument to Dawkins, is that. But I'd probably go further than that as well. But if you're saying that Christianity is a good thing for society, and our society will essentially collapse without it, but you're saying you're happy about people's belief in it going down, that's so fundamentally insane. It's an impossible position. But it sort of confirms that what I've always thought, that, or long thought, that atheists are kind of Christians anyway. He says, I'm these culturally Christian and so on. Atheism is just a branch of Christianity. It's come out of Christianity. It's not come from the Muslim world. It's not come from the Amazon rainforest. It's come from Christianity. But it's, I tell you what, we don't want the belief part. They're kind of selfish, stubborn boomers. It's kind of a boomer branch of Christianity, right? Because when he says, I find that I like to live in a culturally Christian country, although I do not believe a single word of the Christian faith.
So ridiculous.
But what on earth? I mean, that's the fun. I mean, but Peterson has very much wrestled with this whole problem his whole career. And I noticed his wife was getting confirmed or something in the Catholic Church that day, but he still wasn't. He's still there going, well, I mean, from a Jungian perspective, what's he there just sort of, we always have to quote Peterson, but what's he there just going, well, yeah, this is all great, guys. And I'm more interested in Carl Jung and the archetypes. Like, who's this guy? But I get it. He's wrestling with it and so on.
Yeah.
But it's such a strange thing. I think it's just the only honourable thing to do once you've acknowledged what Dawkins has, is just say, well, yeah, I'm basically a Christian then. But he almost is. He's just sticking the word cultural in there.
Yeah. Yeah. So can I just ask you though? So how, just to be clear, and I'm not suggesting your view is the same as Dawkins, but how would you specifically distinguish your view from Dawkins? So are you saying that people should try and believe in it because of the beneficial effects, whereas Dawkins is saying it's good if people don't believe in it, but he still wants the beneficial effects? Is that
Yeah, and
you were
I'm
saying.
saying a lot more than that, but I just got slightly put off by our connection. So I didn't phrase it very well. I'm going to blame that because, I'm saying what I actually am saying. I know that's quite a weak argument. What I'm saying is initially, when I thought when I thought it through,
Mm.
which I probably said before, I thought, okay, we need the ethics of Christianity, we need the cultural Christianity, as Dawkins would put it, but we don't have the belief part anymore. And we need to have the belief part. It was my critique of Jordan Peterson was that he wants to have the ethics without the
Yeah.
belief, and that's why
Yeah.
so many people have followed it who have put off Christianity. That's also the great gaping hole in the middle of it. So I said,
Yeah.
well, it would be good to have the belief part. Then I immediately was hit by the revelation. Why not just believe then? And then I was immediately hit by the follow-up thought that that's probably what it's always been. And you can
Yeah.
go back, if you do go back to Pascal, you're there in 16 whatever, and people are still wondering about it. There's a myth that I think are now in our scientist world that somehow religion was a thing of the past and we kind of grew out of it because of technology and science. But actually, it doesn't look like that now. It's starting to look far more cyclical. Apparently, there's also, according to a book about Steve Bannon I was listening to, you might be able to help with this. There's also
Mm.
apparently a branch of theology that says history was cyclical until Christ, and then it becomes linear.
Right.
But which is another idea. But basically, there's this naive idea amongst the scientist class, the atheist class, the materialist types that we've outgrown this. Whereas actually,
Yeah.
it's clear if you look throughout history, there's always incredibly smart people wrestling with it either
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
And I would cite Lewis and Tolkien. I say, are you really smarter than these people? Are you smarter than Pascal? Are you smarter than all these people? So all I'm saying is, initially, when I thought it through, I did come back to it rationally. And then all kinds of things happened. I mean, I did have that dream I've talked to you about where I saw Jesus and God. And
Mm.
when I spoke to Carl Benjamin, he said he finds that far more persuasive to just, my subjective experience of a dream rather
Right.
than my sort of rational argument. But I think the rational argument should be given more weight. Peter Hitchens said, he looked at it and said, would I rather live in a world
Mm.
where my life has no meaning, or where things I do have meaning somewhere else and do matter? And he said that's a clear choice. And it's not completely obvious
Yeah.
that you'd want to choose that, because the atheist, he claims, chooses not to have God because then his actions don't matter, so he can be hedonistic and do what he wants. So it's not
Mm.
absolutely clear that, of course, you choose Christianity because you want the afterlife or something. Many atheists might choose not to because they want to do what they want, right?
Mm. Yeah.
He points out it's always a decision.
Yeah.
But I just think people are waiting around to have some evangelical speaking in tongues moment. So my argument's more modest. My argument is just that as a way back to Christianity, you might be able to start by going, if I was Dawkins, if I've said this, that it's much better that we live in a Christian culture and society, maybe I could start with that and say, okay, should I then look into it and be a bit more open-minded to it? Then
Mm.
maybe the belief part would follow. I think probably all I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult to know what he means by he thinks belief in it going down is a good thing on the one hand, but on the other hand, he thinks that the persistence of the religion is beneficial. Why? I just can't see why belief. So presumably, he would say that belief in it is going down is a good thing. Is a good thing because it's false,
Yes,
and
because
it's good not to believe false things.
because he says later in the interview, obviously I don't believe in the virgin birth. And he said, do you? And do you? He says to Rachel Johnson, it's Boris Johnson's sister, and he's going, do you? And he's going, do you believe in the resurrection? I don't think you do you? And she's like, well, and more Christians should be able to answer that, because I've spoken to Christians who go, I don't know. It's pretty key to be able to
Yeah,
answer that. So she should just be able to say yes to that.
is
She
she a
says something.
Christian?
Yeah, it seemed like she said she's more than a cultural Christian. She
Okay.
said she was, she was, where was she? She was visiting somewhere near where Jesus was, and said it was very powerful and all this. It was a kind of wishy-washy answer, and it was she could have just said yes, but she said, well, I want to believe. And he goes, oh, well, that's a very different thing. And he's making the claim that I don't think anyone believes this stuff, and you don't believe it, and I don't. So he's saying, yeah, I don't believe in virgin birth, I don't believe in resurrection, therefore that's all nonsense. The Bible I don't believe in, but I believe in all the products of this
Yeah.
terrible set of views.
Yeah, this completely false set of beliefs, which has formed the basis of Western civilization. I don't believe in any of it, but I want all of the fruits of it because I think they're good. Although he wouldn't embrace all of the fruits. Yeah, I mean, and that's an important point which I wanted to make. Dawkins is talking about I like. What does he say? He says, "I like to live in a Christian culture." It sounds very
Yeah. I find that I like to live in a culture, Christian country.
Yeah.
I find that I
Yeah,
like it.
I find that I like to live. But I mean, if you look at the way that our culture's changed over the last 60 years, so I would suggest that our culture has radically de-Christianized over the past 60 years. I was just looking at something actually in this book. It's by an evangelical sociologist called Clifford Hill. But he goes through, it's a book called The Reshaping of Britain. But he goes through all of the laws that have been changed actually in the last 70 years that have essentially de-Christianized Britain. So things to do with, for example, mediums and witchcraft, obscene publications, abortion, sexual offences, what else? Divorce, human fertilization and embryology, Sunday trading, various things to do with family law. And most up to date would be stuff like the Gender Recognition Act and the same-sex couple, or the Marriage Act, which is to do with same-sex relationships. So if you look at it in that, just even in that sort of brief historical perspective, that short historical perspective of the last 60, 70 years, things have changed absolutely massively up until this point. And I'm certain that somebody like Dawkins would say, oh, well, that's a good thing. All of those things you've mentioned are very, very good things. But the point I would like to make is that there's no reason whatsoever to believe that we can just fix this point in history and say, yeah, this is the kind of cultural Christianity that we like. And so we're going to hold on to this and we're just going to have it in perpetuity. What will actually happen is that the post-Christian metaphysics, or whatever you want to call it, the thing that people actually believe about the nature of reality, will start to work its way out more and more in Western countries. And we've discussed this, I'm sure we've discussed this already on the podcast, that we're already seeing this happen, not least in the proliferation of abortion. Just this week we've had Labour MPs talking about legalizing abortion up to birth. I was just reading something about written by a Canadian pastor about abortion in Canada. He's citing statistics for so-called live birth abortions in Canada, which is completely legal under certain circumstances. I think it was in 2020, 2021, it might have been the following year, where there were 127 live birth abortions recorded, which is infanticide. It's just straightforward, the killing of a child. Child is born alive because an abortion has been botched, and then the child is left to die. This is where we're going. We're going towards that kind of thing. Infanticide, euthanasia, which is the killing of the elderly and the weak and the inconvenient by the state. And all sorts of other things will come as well. And many of those things are unforeseeable at the moment because we couldn't possibly imagine them. I mean, a listener to my podcast sent me a suggestion, which, this might sound outlandish, but he was talking about, well, what could it be the case that people who are euthanized are then, their bodies are recycled and made into food? I don't know. I mean, that could happen. I'd never really thought about it before. It wasn't a very nice suggestion, but when we move beyond the Christian, we are going to move into another space, and it's not going to resemble Christianity. It's going to be completely different as a result. So we can't have this. And any sort of suggestion that there will be, I love Toby. I think he's a great guy. But like any suggestion that like somebody in a library somewhere is going to come up with some kind of political solution to this is, well, it's fanciful. Let's put it that way. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, so many things to address there. I mean, one is that just came to my mind was this thing from Nadine Dorris. I don't know if you followed this, where she saw a live baby.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
She said it changed. I mean, there's a headline here: "Seeing baby born alive after abortion changed me profoundly." They basically let it sort of die on the table, and she said it was breathing, and the nurse goes, "You didn't see that," basically.
Yeah, it's barbaric, and it's it's a return to pre-Christian Greco-Roman pagan attitudes towards children. Exposure was common. It was commonly accepted. It was completely legal at the time. Thousands and thousands of children were exposed as a matter of course, and that is where we're going. This is going to become acceptable. But we've got just enough of a Christian conscience left to actually be able to identify it and realize it at the moment. And, we've just got to pray that more and more people wake up to this, because if they don't, we are going to move into a completely post-Christian culture of death. and we're going to see this kind of thing is going to be normalized. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. I was going to say the same, but yeah, I was just looking at this Nadine Dorris piece. This guy found the exact thing. She said it was. She said the baby lived and died in the space of 7 minutes. It was alive for 7 minutes. She said, distressed, I turned to the ward sister and said he was breathing. Through her dark-rimmed glasses, she glared at me, saying, "No, he wasn't. You didn't see that."
Yeah,
Imagine that. So
it's
the
disgusting.
thing is, that will be normal. As you say, a death cult. I mean, I don't think it's too much of an exaggeration to say that Labour, when they get in, Starmer wants assisted dying.
Yeah.
As you say, people want abortion up to term. So it's a death cult on both ends. We're going to be killing old people. We'll talk about it later probably, but the guy in Belgium saying we should kill old people when they don't like their lives anymore. Matthew Parris saying the same. You very quickly see what a post-Christian world will look like. It will be a materialist death cult, as you say. And yes, Dawkins is very much enjoying the dregs of the Christian society, saying, "Oh, it's nice because we still have the cathedrals," but he doesn't realize the hell that's coming.
He'll be gone by the time it happens as well. I mean, he's in his obviously he might be around for a few more years, but by the time this starts to manifest it, basically the damage will be done, and he'll have been responsible for at least some of it. So
there's one part I wanted to pick up that because I haven't studied any philosophy. I've read a load of novels, and you can read my top 10 novels on my Substack, nickdixon.net. But I used to read 100 novels a year and have all these targets to read all these. Who knows why I was obsessed with that? And I did have an MA in literature and so on. But the point is, I haven't read any philosophy, so I don't know what I'm talking about. But is there a thing whereby a false belief can lead to good? So, Dawkins saying he doesn't believe in the virgin birth and so on, but he believes in the outcomes. What if I believe that we were related? I mean, it's unlikely because you're very dark hair and my very Viking light hair. You've got to kind of you're wearing that vestiges, whatever they're called the other day at Easter, and you look like, I don't know what they're called, but vestment, sorry. What did I say? Vestige. That's a completely wrong word. Sorry. We'll edit that. We won't. It's too difficult. But I'll just look stupid. You're wearing the vestment, and you look like a sort of 17th century painting because you've got that look anyway. You've got some sort of, I don't know if it's the Jacobean. I don't know what it is. Have you noticed that you look sort of like an old painting? You've got like a classic English look, but it's a completely different look to mine, which is the Viking light hair.
Yeah, no one's ever said that to me before, but people have said that I look like John Calvin. And there's because of my beard kind of sticks out slightly at the chin, and there's a particular statue in Winchester Cathedral which my friends have mocked me that I look like. But yeah, no one said I look like an English. What did you say? A 17th century English painting? No one said that to me before.
It's a great compliment. The point I'm building to is if I thought we were related, as unlikely as that would be given our different hair colors and so on. And I thought you were my brother, and therefore it led to me treating you really well or something, although not we necessarily do treat our brothers that well all the time. But would that be a problem then? Would that be immoral or would it be, see what I mean? Something like that just came to my head.
I'm not suggesting it's immoral. I'm just saying that the consistency of the belief will work itself out eventually. So if you have enough people who believe, for example, the Christian idea that, man is made in the image of God, and that therefore human life is sacred and needs to be protected in all its forms, that will work its way out in the culture. And there's manifest evidence of this. In my book, forthcoming book, I talk about it as many other people have done. This is not really original in any way, but I talk about it in the contrast between the Greco-Roman period and the Christian period. Just the way that women and children were treated and thought of is completely different. I mean, in the Greco-Roman period, the man was had the power of life and death over the wife and the children. Routinely killed his children, both in terms of forcing his wife to have abortions, and in terms of exposing his children. That was just completely normal. That vanishes in the Christian era. And the only reason for that is Christianity. It's because of the beliefs, it's because of the metaphysics and the belief in the objective reality of the Christian religion. So my point is that when those beliefs change, the metaphysics, the beliefs, and so on, then the outworking will change as well. It's just an inevitability, and we can already see it happening. We're on the cusp. I think we're on the cusp. I think the abortion thing was really, really significant in the 60s. Can't remember when it was. I think it was 69. It was legalized in this country. And I think the next domino to fall is euthanasia. I think euthanasia is a massive thing because it fundamentally changes the what would you say? Like it fundamentally changes the relationship between the state and its citizens. So citizens become potential targets of killing by the state. It really does change things significantly, and we can already see that happening. So that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying it's immoral to have inconsistent beliefs. I'm just saying that there's an inevitability about it which will work itself out eventually.
Okay. Yeah. Abortion Act, it was 1967, I think.
Was it 67? Yeah. Okay.
Yes. And I got confused about the vestiges of Christianity in the culture. That's why I said that. I was thinking of that phrase because we're very much in that now.
Yeah.
But let's address the other Dawkins point then, before getting onto all the other stuff, which is he said, if I had to choose between Christianity and Islam, I'd choose Christianity every single time. I mean, it seems to me to be a fundamentally decent religion in a way that I think Islam is not. And he said, when asked if it would be a problem if we had a Muslim majority, he said, I think it would be a terrible thing. And insofar as Christianity can be seen as a bulwark against Islam, I think it's a very good thing.
Yes.
So
he hesitated, didn't he?
Because he's worried. I mean, there's another time with Piers Morgan, wasn't it, where he just refused to talk about Islam at all.
Yeah.
You can understand if with the world of Batley Grammar School and all these things, you can understand it.
Yeah,
but
of course you can.
And people getting Salman Rushdie and all these things, you can understand it. But he was a bit more bold there. And so he acknowledged there that, of course, because it won't be a vacuum. That's the other thing. It won't be a vacuum. As you suggested, secular materialism will come in and just kill everyone via abortion and euthanasia. But another thing that can happen is Islam will come in and replace it with other things that Dawkins wouldn't like. So, although we don't know I don't know what he thinks about abortion and euthanasia, but he certainly admits he wouldn't like Islam.
But what's he advocating, though? I mean, that's the thing. It's like, really, what is he advocating?
He's cathedrals against Islam, I think, is what he's advocating.
Like a completely inconsistent society where everyone's an atheist, but everyone acts like they're a certain type of Christian. That's basically what he's advocating.
It's kind of everyone. It's sort of Christians are pulling the whole weight of the culture. It's like, I'm glad that they exist and that they bothered to build these cathedrals. I can't believe it, but good that they're there. It's that sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's something like that. Like people feel about the Amish or something. Like, oh, that's nice. It's something along those lines.
Yeah, I'm pleased they exist, but yeah. Sorry, you were about to make a point when I think. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, I was only about to double down on that point that things will enter into that vacuum. There won't. There's no option where something other ideology doesn't usurp Christianity. Whether it's wokeness, which we'll talk about later as well. Whether it's Islam, whether it's a very aggressive materialism that just starts killing people through euthanasia, something will enter that space.
Yeah.
The only other thing I was going to add perhaps was that he had some lame stuff about bishops and female bishops and vicars. He says, obviously Christianity hasn't got everything right. There was things about female bishops and vicars. And then
must be amazing to be right about everything.
I know,
but it's just been incredible to be Dawkins and just to know what's right in every circumstance and to be able to judge the world's religions against that standard.
It's just the liberal, secular liberal mentality, isn't it? It's just judging everything through a frame of feminism. So Christianity is bad because at certain times it's not feminist enough.
Yeah.
But it's overall quite good because of the cathedrals. But then he also says, whereas the holy books of Islam promote an active hostility to women. So it's all just in terms of feminism. Which one's they're not quite feminist enough. Christianity's not perfectly feminist, but it's okay. But how can you have that? Of course, you can't have all the nice things about Christianity, but all the nice things he likes about liberalism as well. You can't have that's a good question. Is Christianity at odds with liberalism, or is it a development of liberalism? That's kind of what you run into there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a massive question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, on the women question, again, this is just the absurdity of Dawkins' viewpoint because you look at the revolutionary character of Christianity. The Apostle Paul. I may have said this before in the podcast as well, but the Apostle Paul telling wives, submit to your husbands. Husbands, love your wives and give yourselves up for them as Christ gave himself up for the church. That view would have been completely ridiculous to the mind of a Roman citizen, for example. They didn't think about women like that. They didn't think about their wives like that. That comes from Christianity. So any sort of conversation around women's rights or feminism or anything like that is completely unthinkable without Christianity, without the Christian framework. Now, I think it's gone way too far, and I mean too far is like the wrong phrase really. It's departed from a properly Christian view of men and women and their distinctive roles in the family and in the church. But even so, the idea that Dawkins is in a position to critique it from his, perfectly enlightened, objective viewpoint is laughable. It's completely nonsensical from a historical perspective.
Yeah. I'm just wondering whether to go do any more Dawkins or not. Yes. Okay. Well, maybe we can move on to the implications of all this then. Maybe we can move on to your critique of Toby, because that is actually related. So there was my other podcast with Toby Young, the Weekly Skeptic. I'm sure you all know. We sometimes get into these debates. One of them was about Christianity, and I got into debate again with Toby for Nigel Farage's birthday. A series of name drops, I'm afraid. Here it was Toby talking to David Starkey, the legendary Starkey. We're both from Kendal, so that was a good in I had with David.
Nice,
great guy to talk to. Perhaps our greatest living historian. But Toby was espousing a view, and I've texted him today to try and clarify it before we came on, but he hasn't replied yet. But he always espouses this view, though. Anyway, it's basically, oh, here he goes. He's replied. We can read it out in pretty much real time.
Yeah.
They're not least consented to me reading this, but I'm sure he wouldn't mind. He wouldn't mind. He said, so I said to him, when you said to Starkey, the issue was Christianity without restraint becomes wokeness. What was the restraint? Was it the spiritual belief in Christianity itself? He said it was Britain's Roman history and heritage, the ethic of public service, patriotism, the veneration of great men, the rule of law, ancestor worship, sense of imperial mission. That pre-Christian tradition kept Christianity in check. But what's happened in the past 25 to 60 years is that tradition has vanished, thereby removing the constraints on the destructive radicalism in Christianity. The egalitarian component, the veneration of the weak, the suspicion of great men, the moral universalism, the denigration of the nation state. And because he said something very similar on the podcast.
Oh, what is he talking about? Oh, man.
So now you get to rebut
crazy.
Toby directly.
What is he on about? Sorry, no, I love Toby, but I just think he's way off there. That list of things, he's claiming that first list of things came from Greco-Roman paganism, where he mentions the rule of law, for example. I mean, that is absolutely laughable. That he's got to rethink that. That comes from Christianity. It comes actually from England. The idea of the rule of law. I'd recommend Tom Bingham's book, which is called The Rule of Law, and that. I mean, that's just nonsense from a historical perspective. And that's it's also directly linked to the idea of the all these words have been hijacked by progressive liberals, but the equality of human beings is linked to the concept of the rule of law, because the rule of law says that there is no human being that is above the law, and every human being has to be treated the same. Now, the idea that was in place in Rome is absolutely absurd. I mean, it's absolutely crazy, because they were pagans and they believed that the emperors were literally gods. It just did not exist in that culture. So from a historical perspective, that's nonsense. What else did he say? He said that the nation state is something that Christianity looks upon with suspicion. Is that what he said?
The denigration of the nation state.
Comes
more from liberalism, surely.
I just don't even know what he's talking about. It comes from sort of
modern global. It comes from the globalist interpretation of liberalism, doesn't it? I mean,
there are many Christian theologians who argue that the idea of the nation state actually originated in the Hebrew scriptures in the form of the nation of Israel. So, again, I'm speaking slightly outside of my area of knowledge here, but I'd be very surprised if there was a sort of equivalent view of the nation state, or an analogous view of the nation state in for example, the way that the Romans saw themselves. They saw themselves as a kind of globalist empire, not a nation state. Again, I just think that's very, very spurious.
It might be fair to have him on, and I'm sure he'll be able to come up with some good rebuttals, because he's always good at debate. But yeah, I mean, this idea.
Come on, like the Romans were globalists, weren't they? They're not.
I see what you mean.
They're not. It's not Jacob Rees-Mogg. They're talking about completely dominating the entire world with through invasion and conquest.
Yeah, I think that nation-state claim is questionable. I think the rule of law claim highly questionable, because Christianity surely is the basis of our modern laws, the ones that Toby would recognise and applaud. So that one's very dubious. The one that might be more persuasive is the veneration of great men, because is Christianity, one could argue, a kind of inversion of that, and a sort of celebration of. I know there's the meek, and that's misunderstood, but then Jesus' sacrifice itself forgive them for they know not what they do, and all these kind of things. Is there a change from the kind of what a sort of Nietzschean praising of strength and master morality to actually saying no, there's a kind of weakness that is actually stronger in an Obi-Wan sense. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think that's probably true. There probably is some truth in that, but I would just say that the Christian view is manifestly superior to the pagan view. I mean, people like Julius Caesar were seen to be great men in those days, and these were people who murdered hundreds of thousands, or if not millions of people. The Christian view is that greatness is found in humility, righteousness, self-sacrificial love. In self-control, in all of these Christian virtues. So I mean that is true. That's definitely changed, but I think that's a good change personally. And I don't. All right. So anyway, so I won't go too far. That's just answering your question. I was about to say something about the woke thing, but
Yeah, no, we should do the woke thing.
Just to be precise about it. Yeah, sorry.
We should do that because the thrust of his claim seemed to be that wokeness, therefore, is untrammeled wokeness. I mean, the egalitarian component runs amok. I mean, and Starkey agreed with him, and I wasn't there, and I was annoyed because I didn't have the knowledge to prove them both wrong, which would have been good because
sorry, it's just nonsense what he's saying. I'm sorry, I love Toby. I think he's doing great stuff, but I mean this is just nonsense. The untrammeled wokeness is due to the rejection of Christianity. Woke people are not Christians. This. I mean, obviously there are Christians who are woke, but
well, he'd say that's why the Church of England has gone so woke. He's saying it's a natural progression of Christianity. That's what he'd say.
It's a natural progression of Christianity to be woke.
Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, I would just say I think that's just completely wrong. Like wokeness is a repudiation of Christianity. Wokeness doesn't proceed naturally from Orthodox Christianity at all. And I would say it's promoted by progressive liberals who, on the whole, have no interest in Christianity. So my argument would be that the bulwark to protect us from any of these post-Christian manifestations is actual belief in Christianity, in Orthodox Christianity. And the reason that we get these things is because of a rejection of Christianity. I mean, I'd say the same thing about like Marxism or something like that. It's a form of Christianity. Yes, of course it is. It's a secularized form of Christianity. It's an immanentized form of Christianity. And it's the same thing with wokeism, in my opinion. You don't need. All I'm saying is you don't need to invoke the loss of Greco-Roman values in order to explain wokeism. I just think you just don't need to do that. I just think it's outlandish.
He may have got a lot of this from Tom Holland as well. I haven't read his book, so have you read that Tom Holland book?
Yeah, and Tom Holland is saying. I mean, I've read it twice, but I haven't read it for a while. He is saying that wokeism is a kind of manifestation of Christianity, and it'd be interesting to get his take on this particular issue. But I don't think he would make that argument about Greco-Roman paganism being a restraining hand, because he sees like I do, he sees a complete differentiation between Greco-Roman paganism and Christianity. I mean, that's a central part of his book, is that the Christian era is unrecognizable compared to the Roman period, and that there's a fundamental revolution in the understanding of humanity through Christ that took place in the first century and onwards. So I don't know what he'd make of Toby's argument. I personally don't think he'd take it very seriously.
I personally, as a layman and with no knowledge of these things, don't see wokeness as Christian in any way. I see it as just another left-wing movement that's cropped up. That's another way of getting leftism into a society, and these have cropped up many times. Bolshevism and lots of the left's always been trying to find a way to destroy the culture, and they thought it was Marxism, and then that didn't work, and they found out the proletariat were not a revolutionary force, and so on, and they get these, and then and probably more like what Peterson says, neo-Marxist postmodernism. Obviously there's postmodernism in there as well.
Yeah,
it seems to be a more radical leftist idea that's fine. Like political correctness was a radical leftist idea that then found its way into the mainstream. Wokeness comes much more from that. Go on.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that's right. But I think you have to see, like you said earlier about atheism, you have to see all of these things within the Christian context in which they came to birth, and that there is I don't want to be too too down on Toby, there is a grain of truth in what he's saying. Is that the overall context is Christian. Marxism, like I said earlier, is a form of immanentized Christianity in lots of ways. So one of the ways would be that it places its emphasis on the proletariat, and it's essentially saying, well, the proletariat need to be liberated from the bourgeoisie. Now, again, in the Roman world, this kind of thing was not, this was not something people were saying. Intellectuals were not saying this in that world because nobody cared about the proletariat, nobody cared about the poor, and so on. And that's only really explicable within a Christian context. That's only why that argument gets any purchase, because people actually care, at least on some level, or some people cared about the poor. They cared about the plight of the people who'd moved into the cities from the country and had these miserable existences working in these factories and so on. So that's one aspect of it, which is obviously Christian in that sense. Now, the overall metaphysics is rejected, and many other aspects of Christianity are rejected, but that aspect of it is not rejected. And it's the same thing in wokeism, I would say, with identity politics, or its precursor, political correctness, and identity politics and wokeism. There's always a claim to care about the weak and the vulnerable and the marginalized, and how these people ought to be protected or promoted, or they should be re-enfranchised in some way. And again, that's not particularly understandable outside of a Christian context. Now, I think it's thoroughly distorted, and in wokeism, the emphasis has changed from, I would say, the Christian emphasis on self-giving, and like I said earlier, like self-sacrificial love, or whatever you want to say. The emphasis has changed from that to a sort of an emphasis upon the virtue of victimhood. So that the highest good is seen in being a victim, rather than being somebody who sort of gives yourself away out of love. So I think there's a distortion there in that sense. But even so, there is a sort of distorted Christian element to it. But I would also say, if I could, sorry, I'm just a bit of this is a bit of me going on and on here. But the other aspect of it is, I think that the woke thing, like the Marxist thing, is a fundamentally kind of different metaphysical paradigm. We are back to a kind of pagan war of all against all, I think, with wokeism. So you've got these kind of different identity groups all claiming victimhood of various degrees, and it's like they're basically kind of fighting against each other in order to be given preeminence in society on the basis of their victimhood. So I would see that as more congruent with a kind of a sort of atheistic metaphysics of flux or chaos, or that kind of postmodern idea, rather than I think specifically Christian, because the Christian idea is, on a metaphysical level, it's that being is fundamentally harmonious. The Trinity is a kind of harmonious unity and difference, and human society and human relationships at their highest reflect that, or at least have the capacity to reflect it in some kind of analogically distinct sense. Whereas the woke thing, if you think about the way the woke view relationships, it really is this kind of this violent sway of competing forces. So yeah, anyway, there's a few thoughts.
Okay, and I suppose there's one perhaps simplistic, but one key difference between Marxism and Christianity, just simply the utopianism of Marxism, or any similar movement believes you can achieve a utopia on Earth versus only in the next life and not on it. So that puts them completely at odds. But you're saying the fundamental veneration of the underclass and the weaker person is a Christian strand.
But the utopianism is a form of it's a distorted kind of Christian idea, isn't it? Because as you said, like if you take it back to paganism, the idea of a kind of linear progression of history towards some kind of definite end, that's not something you really get in Greco-Roman paganism. It's more about like cyclical forms of history and so on. That's a Christian idea. It's just in Marx, it's been immanentized, so it's about this age, and it's brought about by the revolutionary proletariat class and the communist state. It's not brought about by Christ, which is how it's brought about in Orthodox Christianity. So yeah.
Okay, and then you have Andrew Doyle's take on wokeness being a kind of quasi-religious hysteria, basically the witches, Salem witch trials, and so on.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's kind of, I suppose, that's another take that still situates wokeness as somewhat Christian in origin, I suppose. I'd have to go back and read his book
Yeah.
again, but he must be saying that if he's saying it's the witch trials to an extent. And
Well,
you hear it
yeah.
casually called a religion. I'm sure Andrew does call it a religion. You often hear, people like Leo and Kirst and Andrew, and anyone criticizing wokeness often calls it a religion. I don't tend to, because I don't want to even give it the title of religion. I might say cult if I said anything, but
yeah,
that's another. Go on.
Well, I mean, I think everything's a religion. Every viewpoint is a religion, including the secular viewpoint, because religion, in its broadest sense, just means your sort of overall picture of reality. So, if you think that there's no God and that, I don't know, the universe came into being out of nothing however many billion years ago, that's a religious belief, or it's at the very least you would say it's a kind of metaphysical belief. I'm happy to call wokeness a religion. I just think it's a different kind of religion to Christianity. And of course you can differentiate between kind of secular post-Christian religion, where there isn't the kind of formal aspect that there is in religions like Christianity and Islam and so on. So you could say there's a difference there. But I think in the general kind of sense of having an overall picture of the world, anything's a religion, really. I mean, secular liberalism is a kind of religion.
Yeah, the only reason, even though technically, obviously you're right, the only reason I'm hesitant is because they're using religion in my mind as an automatic pejorative. I mean, maybe Andrew's not, because he is Christian. I guess he is a Catholic, I think. But so many people are now in culture. Just to simply say it's a religion means it's bad. That's why I don't want people to use it for
no, I understand.
wokeness.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, it's a bad. Wokeness is a bad religion. They can at least say bad before it, then I'd be okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so is that Toby's argument dealt with? Do you want to do more on that? Because I've got some other questions.
I think, look, I just want to say, I think Toby's a great guy, and I think he's doing amazing work. And sorry if I went off on one a bit there, but I just, this is kind of an area, this is my area really. And I just think some of the things that were said by Toby on your podcast were confusing at best. So, for example, he said, at one point he said, and it may be that he got his terminology wrong, but he said that pre-Reformation Christianity was without transcendence and forgiveness. And then he equated that with being woke. I mean, that's what I wrote to you in a message I wrote to you. Maybe I misheard that, but maybe I misheard that last part. But like the idea that pre-Christianity was pre-Reformation Christianity was without transcendence is, I mean, maybe he didn't mean to say pre-Reformation Christianity. That's what I hope he misspoke, or I misheard. But that is complete.
Did you just mean pre-Reformation culture or something? Maybe?
Yeah, but that's complete nonsense if that's what he meant. I mean, it's utter nonsense. The opposite is the truth. It's the Reformation that brings in the metaphysics. I mean, to be fair, it comes in the late medieval period with people like Duns Scotus and William of Ockham. But it's the Reformation and following that you end up with this kind of metaphysical paradigm in which the metaphysical revolution that accompanies the scientific revolution of the 17th century can actually happen when the atheistic framework was born, and then you set the scene for the possibility of secular liberalism following. The pre-Reformation period was suffused with transcendent belief, and that's why all our towns and villages in this country are built around parish churches and cathedrals, because everything was about theology, like literally everything. People had a thoroughly supernatural worldview, not just in terms of like believing in miracles and the real presence and everything like that, but just in general in life. I've mentioned before on the show Charles Taylor's A Secular Age, which I wrote a book about, and just read Charles Taylor, and recognize the reality of what I'm saying. Anyway, sorry. So I may have misheard. Toby may have misspoke, but I just want to clear that up because that needs to be said.
Okay. Well, it's tough on Toby because
He's not here.
He's going. Well, he's not here, but he's also going up against the guy that literally wrote the book on it. And I doubt there's many people with more expertise in this than you in the country. So
Well, I
possibly
don't
the
know. I
world.
don't know
So,
about. I don't know about that. No.
well, no,
Don't
I will
overstate
say
it.
that. I mean, because like you say, it's your expert area.
Well, I'm getting it from actual academics like Charles Taylor and theologians like John Milbank. That's who I'm following in this. But I think the historical claim that miracles were widely believed in, and that basically pre-Reformation people had a transcendent worldview, is completely uncontroversial. Another book would be, Eamon Duffy's book, The Stripping of the Altars, which is about pre-Reformation religion in England in the 15th century, I think. And that's like a 600-page book, and it's just it's uncontestable what I'm saying from a historical perspective. So as I say, it may be that Toby just said the wrong thing, but it triggered me. It triggered me, Nick.
What would be great, and Toby suggested this actually, would be you and Starkey debate this. We managed to get you on. That'd be amazing. It's hard to get. It's hard to get. It'd be hard to get Starkey these days, but
I don't know, man. That would be a big thing for me.
Wouldn't that be amazing though? Because he would say, but then of course you want to talk about to Starkey about so many things, but he would say that he agreed basically that Christianity is led to wokeness and blah blah blah. And you could go back at Starkey. That would be.
Did he agree about the Greco-Roman thing being a kind of restraining hand?
I'd hate to misquote the great man, but it sounded to me, just from recollecting what was said at a party where there was loud music playing over them annoyingly, it sounded like that Starkey was broadly agreeing with Toby. I don't know exactly on the details, but he was broadly agreeing with it.
Yeah, that's got to be a caveat to this whole conversation, is that we're actually piecing it together from fragments of various places. I mean, I'm reading some WhatsApp messages I sent to you when I was listening to the episode.
A critic might say this is how the Gospels were pieced together. We're piecing it together from several different accounts. We got the Book of Nick and Book of Jamie.
Yeah,
Toby may have said this to Starkey at a party.
My rant to you ended with, and this will be, this can be my final word on the matter. My rant ended: wokeism is secularized Christianity. It's as simple as that. So that's where I'm. Regardless of anything else I'm saying, that's my thesis about wokeism. I think it's secularized Christianity.
So you are conceding that it is somewhat Christian, but it's just a secular version.
You
hinted at that before, but I didn't know.
Yeah, it's like a Christianity. It's a distorted Christianity with the metaphysics taken out and changed, and some elements remaining, but twisted.
Yeah. And a lot more trans people and.
Yeah, but the thing I object to is the notion that Greco-Roman paganism was the restraining hand. I just think that that's nonsense, personally.
Yeah, it wasn't that known for restraining stuff, was it? I agree more with Louise Perry in her repaganizing essay, where she says actually it's Christianity that was became the restraining hand.
Yeah,
on
and that
pagan traditions.
Yeah, she's right. She's right about that, in my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah. So, just last one on Toby bashing. Why was he wrong as well about that episode where he said that we need a new secular philosophy to save the West, and he's just kind of hoping that some bods will get together, that boffins, as the Daily Star always says, will get together and come up with it. That even to me was I just thought that's ridiculous. I think I said it at the time. I mean, you really think that some boffins are going to come up with this new secular philosophy that saves the West? Obviously not. And obviously you've written a book literally forthcoming about why we need to go back to Christianity. So maybe a bit on that.
Well, I just think it's indicative of a kind of Enlightenment mindset that, is basically saying that all we need are better ideas, and then we can solve the problems that we have. And hopefully, I mean, and then there's a kind of almost like slightly comical, hopeful aspect of it, because Toby doesn't even give any sort of suggestion as to what it might be. He just says sort of hopefully somebody's developing these ideas.
Toby's too busy. He's got 8 million jobs to do.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see if anyone's actually trying. But more often than not, intellectual philosophies just lead. Well, I would say pretty much they always lead human beings into misery and bondage. And if anyone is coming up with anything, it will probably be another Karl Marx, and it will result in the death of millions of people and the immiseration of countless others. So, it's a very fanciful notion, in my opinion, to just believe that some kind of intellectual system of ideas is going to save us, and it's completely unimaginable. So it's hard to even comment on it because there's no suggestion as to what even it might be. What would it be? We're now living in a kind of post-liberal age where it's quite clear to people. Like I would cite the political philosopher Patrick Deneen on this. It's quite clear that liberalism has completely failed in its objectives, and that's another way that you could see the wokeism thing is as a rejection of the failures of liberalism. Because liberalism is it's incoherent because it wants liberty and equality. You can't have those two things at the same time. So wokeism is basically, well, we're going to have the equality then, and we're going to have it in a particular way, which you could argue is Marxism is a bit similar to that. So liberalism's failed. I mean, it's been tried and it's failed, and there's nothing else. There's only Christianity, unless we want to go back to paganism, as you've suggested, or who knows what else, like Eastern philosophy. I don't know, but anyway, don't know.
Well,
what do you think?
Well, Andrew Doyle always says to me, he said it on this podcast, liberalism hasn't failed. It's just we always need to work at it. It's never perfect, but it's better than other systems. But if there's any flaws in it, people just go, oh, it's failed, that's it. So he's a staunch defender of liberalism.
Well, why is the world being taken over by woke progressivism then if it's not failed? I mean, why is it being rejected by the Western world?
As a challenge to be fended off, and liberalism's had to fend off various challenges, and that's just another one that we're going to try and win. I suppose you could argue we are winning the war on woke, especially with the Cass review and many other things you could cite, the decline of DEI and so on. You could argue.
Well, I just think the internal incoherence of liberalism is just becoming manifest as time goes on. It's a pretty complicated question because we don't know what liberalism actually is quite a lot of the time. But I would argue that if liberalism is about safeguarding the equality of human beings, then it's manifestly failing, and it's going to fail even worse as time goes on. So that would be another aspect of it as well.
I tend to agree with you. As a layman, as I keep saying on the podcast, with no knowledge of anything, I tend to think, just equality doesn't work, period. So I don't have to worry about liberalism, equality. I'm not go back to the old ways, though we might disagree on how far to go back. We'd agree, but I suppose if you go back to the aristocracy, you can end up going back to some sort of Nietzschean argument rather than the Christian argument. But anyway.
No. I mean, I believe in the equality of people before the law for sure. I just think that the combination of a complete commitment to equality of various different types plus freedom is incoherent. It doesn't work. It cannot work conceptually. There's an internal contradiction between those points of view. And I also think it's partly because of the sort of modern understanding of freedom as freedom from restraint, as opposed to a more classical view, which would see freedom and duty as being, bound up with each other. But yeah, I mean, it's a slightly separate argument. I just think it's just failing, Nick. It's failing. Look at the world around you. I mean, is it succeeding?
No. I agree with you, of course.
It's kind of touching to hear that Andrew Doyle has this faith in liberalism, but I don't know many people who do. Honestly, I really don't.
Yeah, I've also seen Carl Benjamin argue that liberalism leads to communism or is essentially the same thing, and other people have fiercely disagreed with him, like James Lindsay, but I haven't caught up on all that.
I think he's right. I think he's right about that. I don't know the ins and outs of his arguments, but I think, like I said earlier, I think it's the Jewish philosopher Yoram Hazony talks about this, which he calls the dance of liberalism. This because you've got this internal contradiction between freedom and equality. Eventually, people get sick of it because they realize it's not working, and then they say, "Well, we just won't have freedom, then we're going to have equality," and that's basically what Marxism is. And in another way, that's what wokeism is as well.
That's the part that always bothers me because equality precludes freedom because we're not equal, and you have to end up forcing people to try and be equal. And it never works.
But that's only a particular type of equality, though, isn't it? And that's where somebody like Andrew Doyle might make this point, which I think is quite legitimate, is that you can have equality before the law. You can have that. I mean, even if it's partly aspirational, because you can never have perfect justice. Nevertheless, that's a reasonable idea. But what's not reasonable, in my opinion, is to say that you can have, equality of what might be called equality of outcome, or something like that. Equality of possessions, or I don't know. I mean, Marx's solution obviously was to abolish private property, and that's how you're going to have equality. But that's, to me, that's not reasonable, and that leads to absolute chaos and catastrophe.
Yeah, well, I don't even believe in equality before the law. I think men should be treated better off. Bring back the patriarchy. All right, that's Toby dealt with. I mean, he confirmed he didn't mind me talking about it. Though to be fair, he hasn't heard it. I said I might mention it on the podcast with Jamie if you don't mind. He said, "Yeah, no problem." But then again, you may reconsider.
Massive respect to Toby, though, because, like, as I say, like, I think he's a brilliant guy. I disagree with him about this, but, like, I think he valiantly contends for freedom of speech in this culture, and I think that's a really laudable stuff. And he works really, really hard on it as well, and he does a lot of. He's I don't mind saying that, like, the Free Speech Union have helped me massively. So, big respect to Toby. Yeah,
Free Speech Union are amazing. I would say that. I mean, they're even more. They're like Toby's more based child. Even if you don't like Toby, the Free Speech Union will help all kinds of people. Even if Toby might have qualms about associating with them, and so and Toby did create it. So credit to him for that, of course. But yeah, Free Speech Union is amazing, and he does tireless work. He just has no soul, as we've discovered over the course of this episode, and no sense of spirituality, and no clue what he's talking about with Christianity.
But he should read some Charles Taylor. I mean, if he hasn't already, read A Secular Age.
I'll send it to him.
Yeah,
I'll do that. Or you, maybe you should, with a note at the start saying, "Toby, read this, you fool, Jamie."
He's just very busy. I understand he's very busy. He's got things on, and
but he does still manage to read huge amounts as well on the side somehow. No one knows how he does it, but he's a machine. But maybe you should send him some of those books. Okay, well, we finished dissing Toby. Now let's move on to dissing Rory. So this podcast, there's the guest interviews, but then there's also the evolving conversation, which is the rest of it. So you had some rebuttals for Rory. Now, full disclosure, Rory will probably produce this episode. He'll probably listen to this, so let's not be too harsh. But let's be very fair. Even in private, you were very kind about Rory, so I'm sure you weren't going to diss him. And in general, by the way, Rory's a divisive figure on the podcast. I've had people since the last episode saying Rory will be the downfall of the podcast, and that Nick has a deep urge to self-sabotage by having Rory on, which is extraordinary. But then equally, I've had people saying they love Rory, and I've had one here saying, "Great work, Nick. Exceptional episode with the frustrating but always worthwhile Rory this week. Segment subjects were bang on and well debated. Thanks for being my commute companion this week." So a lot of love for Rory as well. He's a divisive figure. But you had just some concerns with his some of his thinking on Christianity.
Well, I mean, let me just say, like, I really, really enjoy the episodes with you and Rory. Rory comes across like really affable, really humble, and intelligent. And so I really enjoy these episodes. And the other thing I would say as well is that it's interesting to have somebody of his age talking about this kind of stuff and having a kind of insight into the mind of what are they, like, Zoomers is what you call him. So what is that from?
The broken Zoomers with. They just have bits of their minds missing and bits of their personality. Yeah. And you laugh when I said that, but they kind of do. I'm just going to get the year when it starts. It starts mid to late 90s.
Okay.
And and I think it ends in the early 2010s. You move on to Alpha.
Is he in his early 20s then?
Yeah. I think he's even 20 still. He's something like that.
Okay.
Yeah,
but and to have somebody speaking, with that level of sophistication at his age is genuinely incredible. Impressive. I mean, I was a complete mess when I was 20.
I was an absolute idiot.
Yeah, me too.
Not an idiot in like crazy like hedonism. I just sort of didn't have a clue about what I was doing.
Yeah. And I wouldn't have been able to speak anywhere near as intelligently about politics as him until and I'm not even saying that I could now, but when I was that age, I was all over the place. So anyway, so it's good. I think it's just fair to say some nice things about Rory first, but I think that it was in the context that discussion about Dawkins, and I really didn't understand what Roy was saying, particularly at one point. And, it'd be interesting to hear what your take is, because we want to sort of understand what he was trying to say before we critique it. But he was sort of saying that that belief, on the whole, I think his point was like belief isn't easy. And he was saying about his grandfather that, his grandfather has played the organ for many, many years, but he doesn't believe in any of the supernatural aspects of Christianity. And and then he was saying, like, people who are really knowledgeable about Christianity really wrestle with their faith, and it doesn't all just come easy, and it doesn't all just come, in a day. And he was sort of talking about this for quite a long time now. So maybe that might be a good point to pause and try and like clarify, like, what did you understand him to be saying there?
To be honest, I do so much content, Jamie. I've pretty much forgotten all of that. I should have re-listened before I came on. But I don't recall that being anything negative. I recall that being in the context of me saying that people imagine belief you're just hit with a rod of
Okay.
lightning one day, and and that's like people. Oh, I'd like to be like you, but I'm not religious. As if
Okay.
as if I'm speaking in tongues and all this kind of thing I've said before. Whereas
Yeah.
it can be much more gradual. People doubt, even the greats doubt and so on, and that's and there's that's not a bad thing to doubt. So I believe that was the context of that.
Okay, because at points it sounded like he was saying that to have sort of certainty or to be kind of fixed in your beliefs in any way was a kind of, I think he called it like a childish or schoolboy kind of way of thinking about things. And it sounded to me a bit like the kind of, the kind of thing you get in postmodern theology sometimes, where people are saying like, being really sort of riddled with doubt and not really believing anything is a sign of a kind of sophisticated or mature faith. Now, as I say, I'm not entirely sure whether he was saying that, but that's not a view I agree with personally. I think that as sophisticated and mature faith grows in certainty, essentially, not in a kind of what would you say, in a kind of mathematical sense, because we can never be certain in that sense. But you grow in your confidence that God is real, that Christ is real, that your relationship with Him is deepening, and so on and so forth. You can also grow intellectually in your confidence as well. Like, I just say, I was thinking about this before I came on, and I'd say, like, I am, very, very convinced that the supernatural realm must be real on a intellectual level. I just think the arguments for naturalism are just completely incoherent and just cannot possibly be true. Um, so there's that to begin with, and then there's a second thing about the context with the Dawkins thing. And again, I don't want to misrepresent Rory, but I would say that the argument against Dawkins is that you can't have cultural Christianity without actual belief in Christianity, and the supernatural component of belief in Christianity, and I would argue also the practice of Christianity, actually going to church and being a Christian, that these things are what the beliefs are. I don't really see what the beliefs are apart from those things. The metaphysics or the belief in the supernatural and the actual practice of Christianity. So all of that stuff has to come together in order for the thing to be consistent. And then the other thing he said was the thing about William Lane Craig, where he's sort of praising
Shall I
William.
address the other one
Oh
first?
yeah,
Because this is
yeah.
just going to
Go
go
on.
on to Big Bang and stuff like that.
No,
Or,
I wasn't going to talk about
I'll just
that,
quickly address that first point, because actually I think it sounds like a better critique of me than Rory, because I don't think Rory has I don't think lack of belief is one of his problems. He goes on Christian retreats in France and stuff. He's going to church twice on Sundays now.
All
So I
right,
think
okay,
actually
that's good.
Rory
That's
is
good.
actually smashing it. I think probably
Yeah.
I'm probably worse for all those things you just mentioned.
Okay.
And I was reminded of Chesterton, that quote: "Merely having an open mind is nothing. The object of opening the mind, as of opening the mouth, is to shut it again on something solid."
Yeah.
I think one thing I struggle with is to endlessly question, and that's just how I am, and I never kind of shut it on anything. Although in the Doug Wilson versus Christopher Hitchens debate, Wilson pointed that out, saying you have to shut it on something. Although
Yeah.
Christopher Hitchens, being the atheist, actually said, "Well, yeah, yes, but not too soon. We've also seen that happen when people are trying to eat." So I suppose you could do it too soon, but the accusation from Wilson was that people do it too late or they don't do it at all. So I think you could, you're calling that postmodern. I mean, I think I'm more like that than Rory personally, but I don't recall the exact bit you mean. But I'm just being very fair to young Rory.
I'm calling postmodern the kind of elevation of doubt to a virtue.
Right.
I think that's a kind of postmodern idea. It's something I've read in what's his name? It'll come back to me in a minute. Like a paradigmatic postmodern theologian. Can't remember his name at the moment. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. The other thing I was going to say is the thing about William Lane Craig. So Rory praised William Lane Craig's dogmatic approach. His kind of rational approach to arguing for the faith. And I was just going to say that I agree. I have a huge amount of admiration for William Lane Craig. Obviously he's going to be different of a different view on some theological issues to me, but the man is an absolute legend. And part of the reason he's such a legend is because he does give such solid, rational arguments for belief. And again, that would mitigate against the notion that doubt is some kind of, inherent and virtuous component of belief. Christian faith is entirely rational because it's the truth, and aspects of it can be demonstrated rationally, and its coherence and consistency can be demonstrated rationally as well. So, as I say, I'm not entirely sure what Rory was trying to say. I just wanted to address that sort of thing about doubt and whether doubt is virtuous or not, and those kind of things, because it sounded to me a bit like Rory was trying to sort of invite people into a sort of ambiguous space where people are not really sure what they think, but they're kind of exploring in this sort of spiritual and kind of in vague sense. The way I see Christianity is not like that. I'm not saying that we have mathematical certainty, but what I'm saying is that Christianity is the truth, and the truth can be appropriated to a great extent rationally, and it can be demonstrated to be coherent, and that there are completely logical and convincing reasons for holding to it. So anyway, but there you go. I hope I'm not being unfair to Rory.
Well, Rory is pretty liberal with a small L, so he might be able to say, explore things if you want. That's the kind of thing he might say. But in his personal belief, I'm sure he seems very firm. But what was the thing about unbelieving priests that he mentioned?
Yeah, he said that there were loads of priests you'd be shocked at how many priests there are, who have trouble with the whole thing and like don't believe in hardly any of it or something like that. And again, he was sort of saying that like it was a good thing. And I was sort of thinking, this is not indicative of some kind of healthy faith when you basically don't believe anything. That's a loss of faith. That's an abandonment of the faith.
My guess is he wasn't saying it was a good thing. Rather, he was saying that one shouldn't take one's own doubt to be a sign that one should completely preclude and rule out Christianity, because guess what? Even priests have doubt. So more of an invitation to the average person who thinks they're an atheist or something to say, you don't have to have it all perfectly worked out. Even priests don't. That's like the way I saw that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a completely reasonable point, and maybe he was trying to say that. And it does that should be said as well, that that people we do go through periods of doubt, the dark night of the soul and everything like that. That is a perfectly reasonable thing to be said. But I mean, I suppose the thing about the priest thing, I'm hearing that in the context of the Church of England, where there is clearly a problem with priests not believing in Orthodox Christianity, and there has been for many, many decades. And to me, that's not something that should be advertised as something positive. It's something that should be sort of lamented over.
Right.
And
in my mind, those are slightly separate. One of them is the Church of England follows wokeness, and that's their religion, not Christianity. They're usurpers. They are frauds, many of them, versus a kind of agonizing old priest on a cliff in Ireland. I'm seeing them as two sort of very different things. One of them having a genuine struggle with his faith. One of them just following a popular ideology. In my mind, that's how it works. Did you see my post to the Archbishop of Canterbury when he said, I wish a blessed Eid al-Fitr to all Muslims celebrating a long thing about Ramadan? I said, hey, mate, you've accidentally posted this from the Archbishop of Canterbury's account. 2.2 thousand likes. Many people agree. Many people agree with me.
Many people. Sorry. The other thing, what was I going to say? Oh, yeah. The other thing about that Rory thing, which was interesting to me, is that is he going to some kind of evangelical charismatic church? I think
he goes to two different types. I think he goes to the sort of more sober one in the morning and the evangelical at night, I believe. Okay. I could be wrong.
Yeah, because if anyone's going to be accused of kind of being too certain about their faith, it's going to be charismatic evangelicals, because they are the ones who I mean, look, I've got great respect for these people, and and no offense to people who are charismatic evangelicals, but they are the ones who say that like you have to be certain, because in order to be blessed by God, that needs to be a response to your faith. So the greater faith you have, the more that God will bless you in certain ways. So there does tend to be sort of high levels of certainty there, but I would say that is often the weakness of that is that it's often quite anti-intellectual, and it's not accompanied by a sufficient emphasis on the life of the mind as well, which is where I think an evangelical like William Lane Craig is so good, because he does bring that emphasis in. So anyway,
Yeah, and that's why I struggle with that evangelical side of it. I struggle with it temperamentally as an English person, as a Northern person from a Church of England background, and as when I say thinking person, not some genius, but a more cerebral type person. So that's why I always stress the sort of rational aspect of how I came back to it. But
yeah,
and
yeah,
on William Lane Craig as well, as I said at the time, my temperament is more like Christopher Hitchens, really. I'd be the one making jokes and then not completely solid arguments and winning the crowd over. But William Lane Craig, everything about him is just super solid. He's just a guy who's super solid.
he's a
Well, and then
machine.
I'm going to rebut this point as well, and then I'm going to eat a healthy breakfast. Like he just, you know what I mean? I'd love to be like that, but I'm just not
Yeah,
like that. But he just doesn't
yeah.
seem to be a dark guy. He just seems to be like a super solid American Christian guy. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
he's a total legend, and I mean, in that debate with Christopher Hitchens, I know Christopher Hitchens may have said one or two funny things, but he was like sweating and rambling and and mumbling. It was embarrassing.
Well, they say he used to drink vodka instead of water on the debates, but he wasn't the healthiest. But yeah, Craig wins the debate, and even said he wasn't too troubled by it. The Wilson and his Hitchens is better. That whole film Collision. Have you watched that?
I've seen it. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
of
very good.
course you have.
Yeah,
Look on
I haven't
talking to
I haven't seen it for quite a while, but yeah, no, I mean, I think Doug Wilson acquitted himself really well there.
He did. I just saying in temperament, I'd be more like the Hitchens making the jokes and stuff. But you know what? Anyway, who cares? The other thing I was going to add on that, you said we got into a debate about. I was pointing out that it's not like atheists of wonder debate about the Big Bang, and that's just a theory. Everything came from nothing. And I tried to fairly represent, without much knowledge, the atheist point about God going, well, then you can they say about God, well, who created God? Then you get into this infinite regress. But you countered and said, nobody made God. God is a necessary being.
That's right. Yeah,
And that's why I was forgetting my theology of the necessary being argument.
Yeah, well, that would be the argument. That would be the answer to that question. Who made God would be that nobody made God because God is a necessary being, and the sort of the way you would get to that point from a kind of purely rational perspective, like somebody like Thomas Aquinas does, is to say that the universe displays. The universe manifests itself as a series of contingent events and things, as it were. So there's nothing about the universe which is necessary. All of the universe appears to be made up of parts of things which are contingent, that is, reliant upon other things. And a whole universe filled with contingent things and events doesn't add up to something necessary. Therefore, on a temporal level, in terms of time, although some have rejected this argument, most famously Aristotle didn't believe this. But on a temporal level or on a logical or metaphysical level, the universe can't be self-existent for that reason. It must be caused by something else. There must be something beyond or above nature that causes the universe, and that is the thing that we think of as God. That would be the kind of logic that Thomas Aquinas uses in his 5 ways. So the as far as I can see, there really are only 2 possibilities. Either the universe is necessary in itself, that is, it's self-existent, it's its own cause in some way. So it must have existed forever in that sense, and also be kind of metaphysically necessary, although I don't really understand how that could be the case. So that's the first option. Or there must be something necessary that caused the universe, and that the universe is actually contingent, so it's reliant upon something else. Those are the 2 options. There's no other logical possibility apart from those 2 things. And since the universe is not self-existent, since it doesn't exist necessarily on a temporal level, it doesn't really seem like it did. It seems like it had a beginning, but certainly on a kind of metaphysical level, then there must be something that it relies upon, something that brought it into being and sustains it in being, and that would be consistent with the view that the Christian view of the existence of a God.
So how does that differ from the Big Bang view, where they say it came into being but nothing caused? Is that the first option, essentially, to say it caused itself?
Well,
or is the Big Bang saying something caused it, but it just exploded?
Well, I don't grant that as a reasonable belief because it would imply that the entirety of everything that exists could come from nothing. And that just can't be true, because nothing cannot cause anything, because nothing is the absence of everything. So nothing has no causal properties. And what happens with somebody like Lawrence Krauss, writing that book, A Universe from Nothing, is he redefines the word nothing so that it means something else, like a quantum fluctuation or something like that. If there was some kind of eternal quantum fluctuation that brought the universe into being, then you'd have to see that quantum fluctuation as as in continuity with the universe. So it would be, as it were, part of the universe. So I think that would be, that would sort of imply that the universe was eternal in some sense, or is infinite in some sense in time. There have been philosophers who have said that the laws of nature are, although the universe is not necessary in itself, the laws of nature might be. So the whatever power it is that makes the laws of nature what they are, that thing is the necessary thing, that thing is the eternally existing thing. But that, to me, like, once you've got to that point, you might as well just believe in God, because you're basically talking about some kind of eternal, non-physical, presumably causally active agent in the universe. Oh, sorry, that has created and sustains the universe. You're basically talking in religious or metaphysical language by that point. So that's where you get to with that. The infinite regress thing, just to say something about that. If you think about it in that temporal sense, and as I say, not all philosophers have agreed about this, but like not all, not all theistic philosophers, but the infinite regress thing, like why could an infinite regress not exist? It's because each chain in the cause of an infinite regress would be a contingent, would be constituted by contingency. So if you had one contingent thing that was reliant on another contingent thing that was reliant on another contingent thing, and you just keep on going back and back and back, that can't logically add up to something necessary. It just conceptually, it just doesn't work, because those are all contingent things. There must be something which either sustains that chain in being, or which actually starts the chain off in the first place. Mm-hmm. It's a logical absurdity to believe that there could be an infinite regress of contingent causation.
Yeah, it's like a load of Russian dolls, but someone had to make the first one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We don't see that logically in our universe, do we? And it's fanciful to believe it. The notion that the universe just popped into existence out of nothing is fanciful as well. It's just belief in magic. What is it? What is that belief? I mean, honestly.
That comedian has a really good bit about that, doesn't he? Pete, what's his name? Pete something. He actually he was a Christian, then he actually left it, but he still has a really good bit about that. I've suddenly forgotten his name. Anyway, never mind.
One other thing to add about this as well, just for anyone,
Pete Holmes has a good
Pete
bit
Holmes,
about that.
Yeah.
Anyway, carry on.
Well, I mean, this is just tangentially, but one of the other things that Dawkins does is he goes, well, even if these arguments were correct, Thomas Aquinas does nothing to demonstrate why, God should also be believed to be omniscient and, omnipotent and omnibenevolent and all this kind of stuff. And it just demonstrates the poverty of Dawkins' knowledge of these things, because Thomas Aquinas writes about this. He goes into hundreds and hundreds of pages worth of details, of these philosophical arguments about why these things should be so, which he demonstrates rationally in the Summa Theologia. It's just Dawkins just didn't read these things. I don't even know. I suspect that Dawkins didn't even read any of the Summa Theologia at all, and he just got it from like an internet page or something, because he's manifestly unacquainted with the material. So anyway, that's just by the by, just while we're talking about Dawkins and that kind of thing.
I'd love that if he was on the LBC, and he's just saying his little points, and it's like, I'm starting to think you didn't even read the Summa Theologica. I mean, you're even familiar with Aquinas, and instead they say, oh yeah, I suppose you're right. It's just once I'd like to hear them say, are you even familiar with
Yeah.
Aquinas, you fool. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's been taken to pieces, as I say, by many people. But one of the most accessible is an American Catholic philosopher called Ed Feser, who's written. I mean, he's written books. He wrote a book, very good book called The Last Delusion, which is about the new atheists. But he's also been, he's on numerous podcasts, just absolutely taking Dawkins to pieces on this because he's an expert on Aquinas and he actually knows what he's talking about.
Okay.
It's like if you read, like, say you got a copy of the origin of On the Origin of Species and you read the first page, and then you went on a massive diatribe in your own book about how Darwin was just completely delusional and everything he said was wrong, and how he didn't say certain things which then turn out, that he did actually say. And then you delivered it to Dawkins' house and said, like, can you take this seriously, please? He would just laugh at you. He'd go absolutely crazy.
I know, because they're playing to the crowd. I mean, given that the average midwit normie is under the assumption that it's all solved and that atheism's the winner, the average Remainer blob person you speak to, and I'm thinking of some people I know, they just assume that it's all solved. So he's already got a massive head start. He just says a few flashy things like, "Oh yeah, it's brilliant,"
Yeah.
and that's where they're at. I mean, the arrogance of it, and at least I don't start from that premise. I find that so strange. Oh, and I just tend to throw that at people and say Tolkien, Lewis, Aquinas, another one. You can say you know better than all
Yeah.
these people. You're just some bloke that works at the bank. I mean, it's
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Well, it's just the belief that we happen to, that happens to be in
Right.
the kind of ascendant in our
The end of
culture,
sort of an
doesn't it?
end of history sort of thing.
Yeah, but I mean, what I'm trying to do in my new book partly is to demonstrate historically why these kind of beliefs might have become popular, and it's nothing to do with people actually reflecting logically and rationally on the existence or non-existence of God or the truth or not of the Christian religion. It's actually largely to do with propaganda.
Yeah.
It's the Enlightenment propaganda. It's there's a very good book actually called Of Popes and Popes and Unicorns, which is written by a couple of authors called uh, one of them's got a really strange name. Of Popes and Unicorns by Ungarano is one of the names, and then there's another name. But anyway, they demonstrate that the idea of the war between science and religion is really a kind of Victorian invention, which was kind of popularized by two writers in the 19th century, and they wrote each of them wrote very, very popular books which popularized this belief and which has come to be sort of out there in the ether now. But their historical claims are mostly totally bogus. And
Whose claim? Sorry, I missed that for a second. I was looking up the.
so
It
the
was
two.
David Hutchings and James C.
Yeah,
Ungarano
yeah,
of Popes and Unicorns. I was looking that up,
yeah.
so I missed what you said about.
Yeah, Hutchings and Ungarano. Yeah, so they talk about those two writers. One of them is called something Dixon White, and the other one is called something else. But they wrote two books independently with very similar names about the warfare between science and religion. And those books were very, very popular, like big sellers in the 19th century. They popularized that idea, which up until then hadn't really been prevalent. But these sort of ideas that we have, like that. For example, that Galileo was persecuted by the Roman Catholic Church and tortured by the Spanish Inquisition, and various other things like the Christians believed the world was flat, or the Christians opposed things like vivisection when in fact it was actually invented in Christian medieval Europe, and just all of these kind of things. They're historical myths mostly. Some of them have a little bit of a grain of truth, like the Galileo thing. There's a grain of truth to that, but it's the way the story is told is utterly misleading. And these things have just been popularized, and they're just there in the kind of popular imagination now. People have this idea that, like, well, yeah. For example, they have this idea that well, Galileo was persecuted by the Roman Catholic Church, therefore Christianity can't be true. That just does not follow logically. I mean, firstly, it's not even really true empirically and historically. It's not true. But even if it were, there's no logic to that belief. That's just that's a non sequitur. It doesn't one thing doesn't follow from the other. But, yeah.
Yes, and that is very much indicative of what Dr. Nima Parvini calls the boomer truth regime that we live in. We live in the 60s liberal paradigm with so many assumptions. And actually, what we've seen in the last few years is the red pilling of people. Isn't that what red pilling really is? It's a questioning of the boomer truth regime and questioning all these liberal assumptions. Lo and
Yeah.
behold, you find they're nearly all nonsense. And then perhaps you end up at God. Some people don't. They end up blackpilled, but you go different routes. And that's the great
Yeah.
thing, is that in seeing all these lies, of course, it's up for grabs, and we get Islam and we get euthanasia, and that's the continuation of the liberal regime, really. But as the liberal regime gets more and more absurd,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
up for grabs which way we're going to go, but people at least question it and say, "Oh,
Yeah.
that's not true. That's not true." That's why I even at the Weekly Skeptic Live said, "Oh, we need to get over this thing that Mandela was great. These
Yeah.
race communists, terrorists, and MLK." I'm like taking them all out, and all these liberal, gods that they all have. I question all of them. Gandhi,
Yeah.
all these people, you find out this dodgy stuff about them. All their political views were much more subversive than you thought,
Yeah.
or much more left wing. People like MLK or whatever it is, and I say question all of them.
Yeah, no, I mean, I tend to agree. I think we've got to take the red pill. Hopefully at least the white pill, which is God and Christianity. But yeah, I think our culture is basically built on lies. I think they're intellectual and moral lies. I think lots of it is completely false, and much of it just needs to be completely rejected. So, and in many ways, I think this conversation is indicative of that. Going back to what I was saying earlier about the Dechristianization of the West, I would say even most Christians are completely unaware of how much things have changed in the last 60 years, and how much these ideas have been embedded into our subconscious, that they're just reasonable and even Christian. Like the notion, I don't actually, I forget. I've been speaking about capital punishment so much recently that I forget which podcast I mentioned it on. But like the notion that capital punishment, the abolition of capital punishment, is some kind of Christian idea is completely the opposite of the truth. It's part of a swathe of innovations that came about due to the dechristianization of legal innovations that came about due to the dechristianization of the West. It's not a Christian idea.
Right.
It's a fundamentally anti-Christian idea.
And I always remind people in this country it came about through leftist agitators, basically, including that guy who was Romanian, and someone quibbled me and said he wasn't Romanian. His parents were both Romanian, Silverman, but also, left-wing agitation for the death penalty. And we've discussed how in nowhere it advocates the death penalty. So I always cite that to people. If life is sacred, you can't take a life. I know people are very squeamish about it. And they say, they think it's a Christian idea. Basically, everything they said, here's my simple rule I've come up with now, a simple heuristic for you. Everyone they say is good is bad, and vice versa. So it is almost infallible, this rule. So any of their liberal heroes are nearly always bad when you dig into it. Then the ones they say are bad are quite often good. Like, I'm not sure Michael Jackson did anything wrong anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like,
did you see that? Did you see that?
I'm red pilled on Michael Jackson. You look into.
Did you see that 4-hour documentary about him?
I could be wrong on that one, possibly. I don't know, but I look at stuff he's saying. I tend to think, I don't know.
What do you think's going on then with all these guys who are saying, like, I was like systematically molested by this guy from the age of like 8 onwards?
Maybe I need to watch the
really,
documentary.
really plausible.
Maybe that's not my best. Might not be my best example, but I think with all the political examples, you do look into them, and they all turn out to be commies. Basically, you always get that. Any liberal hero turns out to be a commie. I'll think of some better examples, but
I mean, for me, a big thing has been the scientific establishment. And this has been like the penny dropping since COVID. Really, I was completely blind to this. I on some level, I think I just bought into the notion that science is objective, and that the scientific establishment, maybe it might be a little bit corrupt. Like, I never really bought the climate change thing, obviously, but I didn't think like there was this level of corruption where you basically can't trust hardly anything of what you're told about what science is saying or what science is doing. But that's a massive thing.
Well, it became the science,
huge.
which meant ideological nonsense. Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's it. And of course, you can go too far. Maybe I went too far in my previous example. Who knows? But you can go too far down the conspiracy route, and everything is false. I've also criticised that, to be fair, because that can be very lazy, and you can lose your humanity in that. But I do think, we question all these liberal gods, and we end up, as you say, we start with the red pill. I think then it can go to the white pill, can go to the black pill, and
I think you can kind of you can anchor this in scripture and in the Christian worldview. The scripture does tell us that the world will oppose God and the things of God and the things of Jesus Christ. And I think that you can look at our culture now and you can see that it's post-Christian, and therefore you can apply that kind of heuristic to, for example, politics and the scientific establishment. And you can look at all of these things with a healthy degree of skepticism. You can say that these people are, they're animated on some level by a hatred of the truth. They are animated by a desire for their own personal gain, and they're willing to do immoral things in order to achieve those ends. And so there's every reason to be suspicious of them. It's not to say that nothing good ever comes out of politics or nothing good ever comes out of the scientific establishment, but it is to say that there should be, I would suggest on a Christian level, there should be a healthy skepticism of these things. And there's certainly, when it comes to morality and ethics and things like that, I mean, that was the thing that I just found so crazy about the COVID thing. It was like, you're just gonna accept, the sort of moral pronouncements of these these atheistic technocrats who are clearly talking nonsense. I mean, it just came across to me as like utterly credulous from on the part of many Christians. Sadly, very sadly.
Yeah, and it was sad that so many churches closed and that Christianity was also discredited along with everything else. But the ones that didn't, or the people that fought it, or the ones that remained more orthodox, come out well. But yeah.
Yeah, and to be fair, it's a learning process for everyone, wasn't it? And for me, it was a learning process. I found it very disturbing. It is extremely disturbing thing to start thinking, well, how much of this so-called science can we trust? If this over here is nonsense, and this is basically led to the shutdown of the entire world, what does that mean for the rest of it? It's disturbing, and I can understand why people resist it. But the world that we're living in is very disturbing. So just to say about this this book, which I've been reading, which I mentioned to you in our WhatsApp message, it's written by an Canadian pastor, Paul Dirks, and it's published by the Ezra Press, associated with Joe Boot. It's called Deep Discipleship for Dark Days. And there's this chapter on it where he's basically talking about the kind of vanguard of the post-Christian decadence. It's called Don't Dine with Demons. And he goes into, lots of detail about abortion and euthanasia. So for example, in Canada, apparently it's kind of routine for veterans to be, when they're struggling with things, and they might require, for example, costly support, to be offered euthanasia. And he actually quotes some correspondence to a female veteran where something like, if it's, I've actually got it here. I'll probably be able to find the quote in seconds. But essentially, if it's too difficult for you to continue living, madam, read one letter, we can offer you medical assistance in dying. This was a female veteran who'd obviously suffering from some kind of trauma or something. So anyway, so abortion, euthanasia. But he also talks about stuff like the increasing push for the acceptance of paedophilia and paedophilic relationships, which obviously manifested itself, with the postmodern figures such as Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida and Jean-Paul Sartre and people like that. But that's coming back in a big way as well. We've seen this thing with the cover up of child kidnapping and prostitution, which was exposed to some extent by that film, The Sound of Freedom, which was absolutely hated by the establishment because it was exposing what these people are actually doing, what these people are aware of. People. Which is further evidenced by Jeffrey Epstein and the obvious widespread knowledge about what was going on there, amongst the elites. And he also talks about Satanism in public life as well, and the way that Satanism is being increasingly and visibly promoted by celebrities and by brands like Balenciaga and all that kind of stuff. I think he cites. I'm not really up on pop music, Nick, as it might not be a big surprise to you, but I think he cites Lady Gaga as a kind of prominent Satanist.
She's definitely done some stuff. There's that rapper kid as well who pretended to be Satan in a video. Yeah, there's loads.
Yeah. And I think it was either Lady Gaga or Lily Allen, who has a relationship with what's her name, Marina.
Yeah, it's Lady Gaga, the Satanist artist woman.
What's her name?
Yeah.
Marina Abramovich. That's it. Yeah. Just all kinds of stuff. This kind of imagery around, obviously like Satanism, blood, cannibalism, all this kind of stuff.
I tried to watch a Lady Gaga documentary, just thinking maybe there's something there, like she's more intelligent than you think or something, which might be intelligent, but there's just nothing there. It was just sort of narcissism and nothingness. I could barely get through it. Sometimes they're smarter than you think or something.
Yeah,
and it's so interesting. It wasn't at all. Just nothing there.
Yeah, so I do agree with you. I think we shouldn't go too far and make ourselves seem silly, but at the same time, and to be too simplistic about it, But at the same time, I just think this kind of stuff is, when I see this kind of stuff, I think, well, if this is the kind of stuff that's publicly visible, what's actually going on beneath the surface? Because this is really dark, what we're seeing.
Yeah, and it's always incredibly important to them to defend things like cuties, that
Yeah.
pedo Netflix thing, but to condemn anyone condemning paedophilia is like, that seems quite important to you to do that. That's very strange. Yeah.
Well, why did the establishment hate The Sound of Freedom so much? This film with Jim Caviezel.
I didn't watch it, and I was worried that apparently people were saying Caviezel watched, I don't want to say the phrase, but he watched very dubious stuff to research for it, and some people were saying he shouldn't even do that. That sounded a bit weird to me, but
I don't know if that's true. I mean, I saw him interviewed by Jordan Peterson, and it's certainly true that the guy, I forget his name actually, the guy who was playing, as part of his job, had to watch, essentially like pornography for hours and hours and hours for the purposes of convicting these people who were engaged in it. But I didn't hear anything about Jim Caviezel. I mean, that sounds like an unfounded smear to me. I can't imagine why that would be the case.
Okay.
But I want to say about that film is I think the film is average, and I think it's kind of it's a strange combination to my mind, because it's about obviously like X-rated subject matter, but it's also a very, very tame film. Like, for example, basically no violence is shown at all in it, and there's no bad language. And I understand why that's the case, because they want to make a film that's accessible, but it has the effect of making the film seem tame in an unrealistic way. And that's the way I felt about it. I know some people absolutely loved it and thought it was a fantastic film. I'm just saying I didn't think it was a great film, but I thought the subject matter was very, very worthy of attention. And the way that it was absolutely went for by the establishment seems to me indicative of the fact that they just didn't like the fact that this was being exposed by a popular film, because it was actually telling the truth about the kind of things that are really going on.
Yes.
And that, if that is the case, it's absolutely satanic, because we're talking about like children being kidnapped and trafficked into sex slavery. What could be a more worthy topic of our concern than that? I mean, especially when you consider like the liberal establishment, who is going on about like caring for the marginalized, caring for the poor, caring for the people who are disadvantaged, and blah blah blah, and they won't even give any time to this topic of child sex trafficking. I mean, it's just disgusting.
Well, we've just seen with the Cass report and all that. They did the same with the trans issue. They defended resolutely the confusing, deliberate confusion and mutilation and permanent life-altering interventions on children. So what do you expect? I mean, I just saw an old clip today of Philip Schofield debating a Christian on this and calling it medieval and abhorrent what she was saying. Abhorrent to not mutilate and children and destroy their lives. I mean, Philip Schofield, not a great record on morality. I mean, these people are absolutely... And I was saying to Simon Evans just on X, isn't this person absolute evil? I mean, even Satan himself was a complicated character, often in literature, fallen angel and so on, and Milton's Satan and so on. Schofield, I think it's fair to say, is worse than Satan. He's a kind of... there's nothing redeeming about him. He's just pure evil. Is that defamation? I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I mean, and to be fair, I don't know enough about him to say it's pure evil. But yeah, like you say, it's not got a great track record. I love it when people describe things as medieval, because to me, it's a compliment. It's like, that's a
based.
good thing.
You're like, yes, Chad, yes, meme. Yeah.
Medieval period was so much better than this one, but, morally speaking.
Yeah, you've got to go as well, haven't you, Jamie? You've already done.
I do. Yeah.
And it's hard to go on.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, like, I feel like I've been quite ranty on this episode, but like, just want to reiterate, like, huge respect to Toby and to Rory. I feel like, in the kind of culture war, we're on the same side. So, I apologise if I've been too ranty. Hopefully it's taken in the spirit it was intended.
Absolutely, and but we should go, because it's hard to top the creation of the universe. Although we did do a little bit after that as well. We even solved the existence of the universe, and then we did a little bit extra. And there's so many books to read off the back of this episode. I mean, it's unbelievable the amount of reading you must have done. Rule of Law, Tom Bingham, Secular Age, Taylor, John Milbank, you mentioned. Stripping of the Altars, Duffy. You mentioned Popes and Unicorns. And you mentioned this last one by the Canadian author, but I didn't get that because I looked at one called Deep Discipleship, but that was by JT English, so I don't know what you're talking.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a great title. I'm honest with you. It's Paul Dirks, Dirks, and I think it would probably have a reasonably limited release in this country because it's published by Ezra Press, but it's called Deep Discipleship for Dark Days.
Oh, so it's another. It has got that in the title. Okay.
Yeah, and I think it's quite good because he's a biblically sound Orthodox Christian pastor who's very, very awake and alive to the kind of things that we're talking about. I have to say I don't really like this term awake, but I don't really know what else to say. Like he knows he has a good understanding of what's going on, and he engages it in a very, in my mind, godly, intelligent way. So I think it's quite a good book actually.
Okay. Well, we've got so many books to read off the back of this episode. And when's your book coming out? It's ages, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going to be in about a year, so I'm just finishing.
Yeah,
it at the
so
moment.
okay. We'll read all these other
but
books.
it's about this topic. I mean, I basically said all my arguments in this podcast. So
there you go.
Yeah,
Don't need to buy the book.
Yeah.
All right. Where do people find you right now, though, Jamie?
Okay, so the Irreverend podcast is my main thing, I suppose, online with Tom and Daniel, who are Anglican vicars, Church of England vicars. We're at reverendpod.com. Everything's on there, reverendpod.com. And then on Twitter, I'm at JamieFranklin40. And then that's about it. And if you live in or near Winchester and you like to come to church, you could come and visit my church. It's Holy Trinity Winchester, where I'm the priest in charge, and it's an Anglo-Catholic church. So lots of bells and smells, vestments, incense, and Orthodox doctrine. So it's a great place to be.
And your Substack as well is just your own name.
Oh yeah, jamiefranklin.substack.com, where I generally speaking write about positive, enjoyable things as a tonic to this kind of relentless darkness that we have to engage.
That's a good idea. And if you want to go to my Substack, it's nickdixon.net, and all my articles are up there, my top novels, my culture war articles. But soon, hopefully, extra podcast content. And soon, if you're a paid subscriber, you'll be able to send in your questions, and I'll be able to ask them of people like Carl Benjamin and hopefully Ben Habib, these kind of people. So if you pay £5 a month, you'll be able to actually ask questions, and I'll put the video up on there of them answering the questions. This is the idea. Don't sue me if it doesn't happen, but I'm pretty sure it will. And at very least, you get all my articles. So nickdixon.net for that. Or just buymeacoffee.com/nickdixon if you want to just donate to keep all this going. I'm going to move into the studio soon, so we really need your support to keep this kind of thing going. I mean, it's very tricky to keep it going otherwise. So nickdixon.net or buymeacoffee.com/nickdixon. We don't have any ads or anything. I'm not even trying to get ads. I'm just doing it purely on faith of the audience. So my little pitch there. And
you don't want ads because then you'll get beholden to the advertisers and they'll control you, Nick. That's how they get in.
I could be beholden for quite a lot of money, but I don't know what that figure is. But so for now, let's stick on the. Yeah, I'm not even bothered. I couldn't be bothered doing them. So I'm like, no, let's just do donations, and people donate anyway. So yeah, just do that instead. If you like the content, thank you very much, and thanks once again for coming back, Jamie.
Yeah, no worries. Really enjoyed it as always.
All right, we'll see you again next week.